Hello there, and welcome to Chapter 1.1, Points, Lines, and Planes. We're going to be talking about some basic figures and concepts that you will continue to use as we move on throughout this chapter as well as this class. The first thing we're going to talk about is a line. A line, many of you know what a line is. Line is a straight line that moves continuously in two directions. It has 0 endpoints. That means it's not going to have a stopping place. So it may have points on the line, like point A, B, and C, but it moves forever in both those directions. It never comes to a complete stop. When we have lines like this, they sometimes are labeled with points like A, B, and C. They also may be labeled with a letter that's in a lowercase in like a script or a cursive, like this little L that I have placed here. So when we label or we use notation to describe this line, we may call it line little L in cursive, just like the little L that we have here. Or we may use 2 points to label the line. We only ever use 2 points. We could use any 2 points that are on said line, but we will only use 2. So I could call this line AB, and we will notate that it is a line that moves in opposite directions by adding a little miniature version of the line on top. Now, AB are not the only points on this line, so I could also call it line BC or line AC. The next thing we will talk about is a line segment. So line segments have endpoints. So they have a finite length or a length that we can measure. It does not continue on in opposite directions. So our line here has points on the end that denote that it stops. So I'm going to call these D and E. And a line segment is fairly simple. You take the 2 points that are on the end and you draw a little line segment over the top. There are no arrows here as this does not continue to move. It has a finite length. Now the combination between these two things is called a ray. And again, some of these things you may have heard in middle school, perhaps. So some of this might be a refresher and some of this might be new. A ray has 1 endpoint, so 1 stopping point, and then it has a line that continues on with an arrow in the opposite direction. So we may have points F and a point over here G. So when we notate this ray, we're going to say FG, but you notice the first letter that I use is the endpoint. It is that stopping point. It has to go first. And then we will actually draw a little miniature ray over the top, moving in the direction where the line is moving. So we cannot say that it is ray GF, because is the arrow moving towards F or is it moving away from F? So this one is a big no-no. Cannot write your ray as such. We also have planes. So planes extend forever in all directions. Think of a flat surface, but it just continues on and on in all directions. When we draw these, they're going to be restricted because it's hard to visualize something continuing on and on forever. But a plane will represent right now as this shape. And think about these sides just continuing on in all directions, moving outward and constantly growing and changing. Now, a plane will have several things in it. It could have points, like point H, point J, and point K. Now, we could have something like H and K being a line segment connected to each other. That is possible. And then just like with our line, we will have a cursive or script letter, sometimes identifying the plane as well, but it's going to be a capital letter. So I'm going to use a capital kind of curly P to represent the plane. So in our notation or words and symbols, we could call this plane P, or we can use 3 points within the plane. 3 points within the plane. So we can say plane H, J, K. Plane H, J, K. You can pick those 3 random points on the plane as well. Now we also have what we call opposite rays. And opposite rays have the same endpoint. So remember, our rays have one endpoint. But move in opposite directions. Now, what does this look like? Well, let's see. If we have rays that move in opposite directions and share an endpoint. So I'm going to call this A, B, and D. So this is telling us that ray BA is an opposite ray. I'm going to use OPP for opposite. It's an opposite ray to ray BD. They move in opposite directions. So it's basically a line with a common endpoint in the middle.